You're watching Stat News Global. I'm Amita Brevi, and joining us from Moscow is Maxim Suchkov. He's an assistant professor and associate professor and senior fellow at the MGIMO, that's the Moscow State Institute of International Relations, as well as a non-resident scholar at the Middle East Institute and ISPI Online. Maxim, Professor Suchkov, thank you so much for giving us time.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Professor Suchkov, just wanted to talk about this really interesting development with Russia announcing that there is going to be this naval facility, a draft agreement, and some details given out of port on the East African coast in Sudan. That's extremely significant considering Russia's past history in terms of the Soviet Union and its engagement in Africa. And apart from in that area, maybe Tartus in Syria, this would be extremely significant. How do you see it?
Well, you mentioned the Soviet Union, and I think the Soviet experience and also kind of the geopolitics of looking at the Middle East and the greater Middle East concept is relevant here because ever since the Soviet times, there was this idea that in order to execute and exercise maximum leverage over the region, you have to have at least, a presence or, some leverage in at least one of the three, and ideally all of the three, the so-called choke points in the Middle East, which is, the Strait of Hormuz, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and the Suez Canal. Now you have the Russian military and other presence in Syria and the naval base in Syrian Tartus, which kind of projects Russian influence and power in the Eastern Mediterranean. You have this relationship with Egypt going on. And now there comes this idea with having this naval facility or the military base, whichever way we want to look at it, in Sudan, which is effectively kind of enabling Russia to be present both in the Eastern Mediterranean, in the Red Sea, with a potential access and exit to the Indian Ocean. And I think what's interesting here that this proposal for the military facility in Sudan was flirted with at least since 2016. And at the time, Russia was given three proposals, one in Libya, one in Somaliland, and the third one in Sudan. And ultimately, it opted for Sudan because it was so important also in terms of, projecting power in Central Africa, where Russia also has some interest and has been pretty active over the course of the recent years. And also because, Sudan is, as I mentioned, is access to the Red Sea, closer to the Saudis, to Yemen. And basically, it kind of gives you an idea that having a military facility in Sudan puts Russia in a position to be able to monitor and participate in the logistics and these communication routes in the area. B, to be present in a potentially security volatile environment, which is Sudan and the rest of the region. And kind of the third component is having a say in the energy market, as well as in this kind of great power spat between America and China in Africa, which Russia is effectively in factor to be counted with.
There have been some details that have been delineated in the official online, that is, after President Putin gave the go-ahead to both the Prime Minister and the Defense Minister. Those delineate at the moment, 25 years, an agreement for 25 years, at least for berthing facilities for ships, and including nuclear-powered ships, right?
Right. So the deal for now, as at least what we have, is eyed for 25 years. This is kind of in a way both to have to or to signal Russia's long-term interest and Russia's long-term protection for the region, and also mitigate potential risks associated with a potential change in the government in Sudan. But also, it is supposed to have, the ceiling, at least for now, is 300 people and 4 ships. Russia, according to the preliminary deal that we see today, is not going to pay for the base, but in return for this base will participate actively in what you've mentioned, but also in the modernization of the Sudanese military and our arms exports. So the kind of this military technical partnership is a big component of this deal, and this is pretty much what for now we see is kind of Sudan's major takeaway from this deal with Russia.
Professor Suchkov, interesting timing. Just a couple of months back, and there's been this whole process with President Trump, the outgoing president of the United States, signing executive order to try and the process has begun to take Sudan off the list of terrorist states. Russia moving in, then, of course, like you said, this has been brewing since 2016, and then Bashir's visit to Moscow, I think, in 2017 as well. But is that part of the reason why it's been announced in the manner it has now?
Right. I think the moment is also interesting, as you argued, and there is a sense that because there are these tectonical shifts going on in the world and the Middle Eastern geopolitics, and frankly, the expectations from the Biden administration in Moscow are pretty, I would say, pessimistic at least. And there is this need to kind of spearhead Russian activity while the United States still has this transition process. Is I think is part of it because this was kind of calculated and flirted with for a long time, and now Moscow thought it was the right timing to go and do things before it kind of solidify its positions before this kind of new uncertainty that comes along with Biden presidency comes over and affects Russian positions in the region.
You were talking about some of the takeaways that Sudan would have, and there has been a legacy of arms trade with the Soviet Union, Russia, in the whole region itself. But when you look at what's happening with America, what's happening transitional-wise, there is part of the military that's still part of that transition. How is Russia looking to cement that deal? Is it actually cemented?
Well, it appears to be, at least is it for now, because the Sudanese military expressed interest in this deal. So for now, it seems that it's going to go through. I mean, perhaps there might be, this doesn't really satisfy, and perhaps I would imagine it's potentially worrisome, not only for the United States, but also for Chinese interests. Because for now, we've seen that, China has been very active, including in Sudan and on the African continent in general, and Russia so far has not been a factor. But now with this military presence in Sudan, it might be.
Sudan itself so is playing all sides to hopefully its advantage.
Yeah, well, I would think they believe so. Yes,
Yeah.
I mean obviously if the Russians are gonna go in and do the modernization of the military and provide some arms, and this in a way solidifies the positions of the army and the military in the country. So in a way, they also are looking for kind of an external anchor for their own positions, and they thought that dealing with Russia as one of the actors that they're dealing with is a good idea. It just perhaps depends on how skillful they are sitting on several chairs, but it's something to be seen.
You were mentioning China, and of course, China and Russia have a partnership, but we've seen what's happened in the past, and who knows what will happen in the future. So, is this a collaborative effort, or could it be potentially confrontationist, considering Djibouti is where the Chinese have been now for years present, even with their submarines?
Right. I mean, Djibouti, as we know, is a host to a great many foreign bases. American base and Chinese base. You mentioned and the French and many other countries. As I mentioned, for now, the general kind of framework for Russia-China relationship is a collaborative one. And I think under Trump, some of the policies of the United States towards Russia pushed Moscow into the hands of China on many fronts, including on most kind of sensitive areas, technological aspects, the production and the construction of 5G in Russia and many other things. But I would say that the general kind of the bottom line formula for the Russia-China relations as of now is this never, not always together, but never against each other. And so far Russia has been able to kind of keep up to that line, but the one road, one belt program does not really embrace Russia to a large degree, and eyes Central Asia, and that might be one area for potential competition, but then there might be others So it's hard to say because when you have a power that is striving for more power, regionally and globally, and at some point it might be a little more thorny than it is today.
Now, the access that it gives, of course, we were looking back through the Red Sea, of course, for the Russian Navy, but then it's opening up the whole Indian Ocean as well, which is presumably one of the thoughts behind it. How does that fit in with the Indo-Pacific concept, which is bandied around a lot and is seen as American-driven, though India has tried to project it as not confrontationist or not exclusivist. There was even an invitation in an interview by the Indian ambassador to Moscow, Bala Venkatesh, saying that the Russians are welcome into the Indo-Pacific.
Well, yes, I think it's a very, very important concept because Russia does not have a kind of open exit to the Indian Ocean, and I think in a way it's been looking for these types of exit at least since the Soviet times, if not earlier, because during even the so-called period of the Great Game with the British in Central Asia, the British thought that the Russians were seeking exit to the Indian Ocean through Afghanistan and India. But now we have this new idea with Sudan, so perhaps this will be kind of Russia's number one priority or a kind of a way to access Indian Ocean. I think there is a degree of underappreciation for the very concept in the Russian policymaking community, in the sense that, as you mentioned, it is indeed looked upon as a primarily American idea that potentially threatens Russian interest and projects American power and underpins American superpower status in the world. But I would think it would make very sense for Russia to give a little more appreciation for the very concept as a genuinely Indian idea, and B, it would make sense policy-wise because in a way it would help diversify Russia's own leverage and toolbox in relations with China and the United States, for that matter.
Now, we do know the India-Russia relationship, and especially on the defense front. India and America have also been, ratcheting up their partnership. There have been foundational agreements that have been signed, the logistic agreements which India has signed with several countries, including the US of late. And we're expecting, if and when the annual summit with Vladimir Putin takes place with India, that the logistics agreement with India could also be signed. Now, India has one with Japan, which probably allows it to use facilities in Djibouti. Would that extend? I know it's a very iffy kind of question, but would that extend once and the agreement with the Russians is signed?
Well, I really hope it does, because I think there is every reason for Moscow to augment its cooperation with India. Obviously, with the absence of a kind of direct border makes things like this, logistics and other areas very dependent on the so-called transition state. And there's a lot of uncertainty and turbulence in the neighboring states around India, so that's definitely a factor. But I think what is even more important, at least as to how this new quote-unquote Cold War between U.S. and China is developing, that it is primarily a competition, less so the ideological and more so kind of techno-economic platforms. And there are countries in the world that would not really want to have this binary choice whether you are for the United States or China. And Russia has this idea that there might be countries that are kind of new digital non-alignment movement, the one that we had during the Soviet time. And in this sense, I think Russia's relations with both European Union and India, who have talent, who have capabilities, who have market capabilities for developing technological products, and makes very sense for kind of this third-party cooperation. And it should not necessarily be against China or against the United States. So it enables both Russia and India to preserve its relations with U.S. and China respectively. But I think that it makes every sense for both Moscow and Delhi to cooperate on this particular front. And what you mentioned, the logistical deal, might be a great place to not to start, but to continue this cooperation, to give it a little more meaning, a little more meat on the skeleton of the good historic ties.
You mentioned other attempts earlier that Russia was trying, say in Libya. Libya, we know, of course, the situation there is possibly one of the factors that it didn't happen. Somaliland, maybe there were reports that they were asking for too much money in terms of setting up a base there. When you see other countries as well, do you see some reports suggesting that Israel is also looking at a port in Sudan? And considering what's happening between the United States, Israel, and Sudan, do you see that as a possibility as well? Because I
I
mean,
think
there's
it's
going to be a
plausible.
party then in Sudan.
I think it's plausible. For now, I would say under Putin, Russia had the best relations with Israel in its history. It wasn't that brilliant under the Soviet Union, as the Soviets were taking more kind of openly pro-Arab standing. So for
Yeah.
now, I wouldn't think of Israeli presence as a potential deterrent to Russia's presence. But I would think it makes ever sense because a lot of European powers and Eurasian powers have come to a full understanding that these kind of not only economic axis but also geopolitical axis is moving to the Indo-Pacific part of the world, and everybody's looking potential leverages and presence and ideas on how to to have more power and presence in the region. So Russia's presence in Sudan, beyond other things that I've talked about, is also
Mhm.
important in terms of securing the communications. And given that some logistical routes go from India into India, go through that part of the world, Russia may come as an effective security partner, including for India. So I think it's a good idea for India as well.
But considering Russia's financial position and even the strength of its navy in comparison to what it was like during Soviet times, how do you see that developing? Uh, I mean, if it's coming, if the ships are coming from Vladivostok, that's a hell of a long route. But if they're coming from the Red Sea itself, then you already have Latakia. So,
Right.
how feasible is it? Is my question. I think I'm
Right.
trying to get at in
This is a
terms of
good question. I think yes, this is a good question, and obviously, policymakers in Moscow were making all these calculations. There was this period of time where there was this concerns that Russia and Turkey may face off
yeah.
militarily, and then people would say, "Look, Middle East is a potential military theater is far away from Russian borders, so Russia will not be able to project power in terms of logistics and other things." So obviously, Russia's Black Sea fleet and
Mhm.
is not as effective as say the Northern Fleet and even the Pacific Fleet. But at the same time, I think over the past few years, ever since the Syria campaign, Moscow has kind of executed this strategy of low investment, high return, where it's trying to place less soldiers, not to overstretch its resources. Moscow understands that it has, limited resources comparing to the Soviet Union or to the United States, even comparing to its own policy ambitions in some degree. And many in the West see it as it's punching above its weight, which is the case in many cases indeed. But at the same time, I think it's trying to have some realistic goals about what it's trying to achieve with the minimal presence that it has. That's why I said the modalities
Mhm.
of this agreement with Sudan seem pretty realistic. 300 people, 4 ships. The logistics can be provided through the Syrian Tartus and Russia's presence in the Eastern Mediterranean. You have this cooperation with Egypt, which is also, I think, in a way interesting, given Egypt's own conflict with Ethiopia and Eritrea and Sudan over the Nile and stuff.
Mhm.
So I think Russia's presence here also is in a way a factor, to support kind of its regional allies' position. So in a way, I think it will be successful as long as its policy ambitions are kept realistic. I don't think Russia is trying. You said that and I agree with that. That Russia's resources in comparison to the United States are modest, but the Russian policy goals are also more modest than
Mhm.
those of America. It doesn't really want to dominate the Indian Ocean or the Middle East, but a number of important policy objectives that could be achieved with the resources given, I think, is realistic as long as they're kept realistic.
Professor Maxim Suchkov, thank you so much for your
Thank you
insights
so much.
and your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, sir.
And just a reminder to our viewers, if you do like our kind of journalism, you can support us on our website and follow us on our social media handles on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You've been watching Strat News Global. I'm Amitabh Brady.